Gosh, well, good morning, everybody. And after I've cleared my throat, let me say I feel very privileged to be here speaking to this very distinguished audience, but also a little surprised as well, because I really never thought of myself as an old-timer. But now it's been pointed out to me, it is more than 50 years since I first came up to Cambridge to read Anth. And that, of course, was by itself a huge mistake. I had no previous exposure whatever to the academic study of either archaeology or anthropology. But when I came up to take the scholarship exams here, I had to choose my course of study. And as a conspicuous all-around underperformer in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. But as it happened, the Cambridge course catalog was alphabetical. And it didn't take me long to decide that Anglo-Saxon wasn't going to be a runner. But then I flipped the page, and there was archaeology and anthropology, and literally a light bulb went off in my head at that point. Not because I knew anything about these subjects, but I had, like Jean Lafontaine, lived in East Africa. And at Makerere College, where my father worked, I'd rub shoulders once in a while with social anthropologists and the occasional archaeologist. And they seemed like reasonably decent folks in, whose steps I might reasonably want to follow. And it was only after I got to Downing Street in 1964 that I discovered that anthropology had a biological aspect as well as its cultural and historical ones. And as several people mentioned in their talks yesterday evening, it is this diversity of subject matter and approaches that is and remains, I think, the true beauty of archaeology and anthropology as a united formula. I mean, these diverse fields are clearly united at their core, but between them they offer an amazing breadth so that anybody walking in the door like me is bound to find something in there that suits them. So I had clearly stumbled into the right place, especially because although it soon became evident that I would be a dreadful social anthropologist, I was immediately attracted to biological anthropology, physical anthropology as it was always called in those days. And that was maybe a bit odd, because while archaeology was a powerhouse here under Graham Clark and social anthropology was flourishing under Maya Fortis, physical anthropology was actually a bit of a backwater in those days. Indeed, when I first arrived, I had a really hard time tracking down my tutor and supervisor, Jack Trevor. Now, Jack was a lovely man, and he'd been famous for his wit and his wonderful lecturing. But by the time that I got here, he was really fairly severely ill, and he tragically died not a long time later. And actually the backbone of physical anthropology at Cambridge in those days, based in the old Duckworth Laboratory, was in fact our technician, Bernard Denston, whom I had the great pleasure of visiting along with Alan Billsborough yesterday afternoon. He's 94 and still going strong, and I have wonderful memories of working with him in his workshop alongside the old Duckworth Laboratory. Now, Bernard was a wonderful and sort of understated man who had learned osteology basically on the job before the Second World War. And when the war came, he was swept up into the army and sent off to Singapore just in time to be there for the capitulation, and he was and to be interned by the Japanese, and he spent 3.5 years in the infamous Changi prison. Now, Bernard didn't talk much about this particular episode in his life, but one thing I heard from him very early on, right after I arrived, was about the historic meeting that had just taken place in Cambridge between Ralph von Koenigswald and Philip Tobias, who were two of the most distinguished paleoanthropologists of the day. Koenigswald was, of course, famous for making very important collections of Homo erectus fossils in Java, and to Tobias had been entrusted by Louis Leakey the study of the wonderful fossils out of Olduvai Gorge that were emerging at that time. And the coolest thing about this meeting between von Koenigswald and Tobias was that both of them brought their actual fossils with them to Cambridge. And the intercontinental comparison of fossils that studied, that resulted, was both hugely exciting as an event, even though I just missed it, and it was a very historically significant event and precedent in paleoanthropology. And it certainly opened my eyes, listening to Bernard's account of this, it opened my eyes to the very visceral excitement of paleoanthropology and of dealing with fossils. So anyway, largely through the encouragement of the osteologist Marie Lawrence, who heroically kept teaching in paleoanthropology and human evolution going during Jack Trevor's later disabilities, I opted to specialize in physical anthropology for my part 2. Although I must admit I was almost sidetracked into Neolithic and Paleolithic archaeology as a result of long supervisions with Eric Higgs, even though those supervisions were normally conducted in his gloomy front parlor where I could barely see him even in the silhouette in those days. But anyway, my commitment to paleoanthropology was sealed the following year in 1965 when David Pilbeam showed up to replace a departing David Hughes as the demonstrator of physical anthropology. Now, Pilbeam had originally come up to Cambridge to read medicine in 1959, but in 1961 he shifted to physical anthropology for his part 2, just as Don Brothwell was leaving the demonstratorship to go to the Natural History Museum. And after he graduated with distinction in 1963, Pilbeam had moved to Yale to do his doctoral work. But only 2 years later, he returned to the Duckworth Laboratory, and he brought with him, despite his youth at the time, an immense maturity of vision, I think, along with enormous energy and enthusiasm. And I was really sort of simultaneously inspired and intimidated by this guy, and he had an enormous effect on me. And he certainly succeeded in inspiring a whole generation of undergraduates like me and graduate students as diverse as Jonathan Musgrave and David Chivers, who's here today, and people coming in from the medical school like Peter Reynolds, who is also here in the audience today. And perhaps even better, with this sort of this increase in activity in the laboratory, we began to welcome such luminaries as Bernard Campbell and John Napier, who came and talked to us and who added enormously to our breadth of experience. Now, I was in touch with David Pilbeam not long ago, and he modestly told me that he believes that Cambridge is now on the international paleoanthropological map because of the activities of Rob Foley. And Rob and Marta Lar have certainly achieved wonderful things in paleoanthropology over the last quarter century or so, and particularly in providing the Duckworth Laboratory with a true permanent home with associated research facilities. But I think it does remain true that Rob and Marta were able to build on a momentum that had begun with David Pilbeam, who in his short time here really reinvigorated paleoanthropology after a relatively fallow period, and who was ably followed a little bit later by our chair today, Alan Billsborough. But although it was at this time that the tradition of paleoanthropology in Cambridge here was truly developing, looking back, it still seems clear to me that even before Pilbeam came back, the Duckworth Laboratory, however dusty and gloomy, it might have been in those days, was somehow a magical and inspiring place to be in. And certainly it was to those who resonated to the long tradition it embodied into the amazing collections it contained. And I think I can honestly say that it was more than anything else the mysterious charisma of this Duckworth Laboratory, this wonderful treasure that you people have here, that galvanized me right from the beginning of my undergraduate experience to choose physical anthropology as a career. As in its modern state-of-the-art incarnation today, it seems set to continue doing with future generations of undergraduates. Thank you.